Okay guys, have you ever been in a conversation where you didn't know what to say next? Maybe you felt stuck or you were second guessing yourself and you couldn't quite transition the conversation in a way that builds connection and attraction in the way that you wanted it to. What if I told you there is a way to eliminate that uncertainty while keeping your interactions natural and fun? Now, most social gurus will tell you to think of things naturally or use your environment as inspiration for the conversation. And while that may work if you're good at improvising and coming up with things off the top of your head, it doesn't always mean that we're in control of the direction of the conversation. And when you're talking to women especially, you want to be able to guide the conversation in a way that keeps you in control and guide it into a flirtatious way, and you could even escalate it into a sexual conversation so that she's primed to know that you are worth being a mate. So today, we're going to be talking about scripts, cheat sheets, and pre-planned stories. Now, many people might say that scripts in particular aren't a very natural thing. They seem very forced in conversation. But if you have ever been that person that's retold a story from something that you've experienced, then you have used a script in some form. It's actually something that's very natural in human conversation. Your scripts and your stories are going to be the secret tools to give you confidence in conversations, to help you guide it, and maybe even control it into a sexual conversation that creates tension that is authentic between you and the girl that you're talking to. Now, I personally have used cheat sheets on my phone in case I forgot what I wanted to say. This could be something like my favorite 3 openers for that time, maybe some pickup lines that I wanted to try out, any party tricks that I feel should be worth bullet pointing, and of course a couple of stories. And they're just going to be pointers of the stories. They don't need to be the whole thing. Maybe just a couple of structures or just the title to remind me. You know, sometimes we just need that trigger to remind us what the story is. And I'm going to share with you my favorite story that I learned from Neil Strauss's book, The Game, in just a moment. But before that, I just want to emphasize, when you're starting out, cheat sheets, they kind of act like the training wheels for conversations. They're there to help you stay on track until this technique becomes second nature. Scripts and stories help you control the vibe of the conversation, and they allow you to shift into deeper topics and even more playful tension. Your story should be able to lead into further conversations once you have set the tone. And that's why it's such a useful tool. It's more of a tone setter as opposed to the full body of the conversation. I would also consider having different stories to guide you through different stages of attraction. So you could be having stories that spark some interest and build some rapport, and then you have other stories that are good at escalating even into physical chemistry. Now, with these scripts, it does give you confidence. And one of the things about confidence is it's not about knowing every word that you're going to say. It's about having a framework that you can adapt in that moment. And that's why tools like this can help you stay calm and focused, which is an incredibly attractive framework to have. Now, I'm going to tell you my favorite story from the book, The Game, and it's the interpretation that I use when I'm talking to someone. So it might not be exactly the same, but it's pretty close. So if I'm having a conversation with a girl, and I would maybe talk about fantasies, for example, because girls love fantasies, I would start saying, you know, there is a woman that wrote a book called My Secret Garden by Nancy Friday. Have you ever heard of it? And chances are they'd say no. And you'd then continue by saying, well, here's the thing. Back in the 60s, there was a group of scientists that, for some reason, believed that women have no sexual fantasies. How ridiculous is that? And of course they're going to say, well, that's stupid because everyone has fantasies. And I'd be like, of course you do, okay? You're not some sort of robot But for some reason, scientists in the 60s, absolutely stupid, do not understand the female brain whatsoever. So this woman, Nancy Friday, she decided to go and interview hundreds of women about their sexual fantasies. And she wouldn't just pick people that were supposedly highly sexually active. She would try and interview as many different women, including women that were maybe Amish or had only done missionary or were married to one person and that's the only person that they've had sex with, and they have really boring, dull sex. But for some reason, their fantasies were wild. Do you want to hear some of them? So the way that Nancy Friday describes the female brain is that it's like a big house with different rooms, and in each room there is a different type of fantasy. So maybe one of them is a group fantasy, maybe one of them is the stranger fantasy, maybe one of them is the getting tied up fantasy. So there'd be people that come up with all sorts of different fantasies, and those are typical run-of-the-mill ones. I remember there was one in particular that kind of blew my mind, and it was this woman that wanted the fantasy of being tied down to a table whilst a bunch of scientists were watching her, and she's being done by a robot. How bizarre is that? Now, I'm sure you don't have anything as crazy as that, but, since we're on the subject, do you have any kind of crazy fantasies? We're all human. I'll happily share mine if you share yours. Now, do you see how that story led into a subject? It created a framework, it created a vibe, an energy, and it was not necessarily trying to be invasive. It was more about other people. And when you have stories about other people, when you have stories about, oh, my friend said this, or I read this, or I learnt this, it detaches you from the subject. So sometimes the subject might be a bit too intense for her immediately, but she will listen to it because you're not directly attached to it. And then when you start talking about the subject together, that's when you can start creating some really deep rapport about that subject. And it doesn't necessarily have to be about fantasies, it can be about anything. It could be about what kind of adventures you guys want to go on, what kind of holidays do you want to experience, what kind of activities do you enjoy together. It can be all kinds of things. But of course, if we're trying to build attraction in a very rapid way, then I usually go down the more flirty sexual route. Now, I want you to take some time to really craft these stories, and you can use other people's stories. Like I said, I use mine from different books. And again, that gives you that separation, so you're talking about a story, and it's not always about an experience that you have had. Now, with all of these stories, you want there to be an element of fun and enjoyment. You want to maybe make each other laugh. And if it's a more vulnerable subject, something that's quite personal, these are great if you're trying to do some one-on-one rapport connection, because that's what's going to create that really deep rapport. Now, when you are deciding to make it a sexual conversation, understand that you're priming the tension for her. And it's important that you read the room, okay? You can't be diving in with sexual conversations straight from the get-go unless she's already giving you that kind of bug. Because, some girls, they're very sexual. But a lot of the time, they're going to keep their guard up a little bit, and you have to work to get to that point. So you're going to read the room carefully. You're going to shift to central topics quite gently and naturally. And hopefully she gets more invested into your stories, and the way that you know about that is if you're asking her questions, she's giving you responses that aren't just one-word responses. And if she fully responds to your story, she's fully invested in you now, okay? Just remember, the more she talks to you, the more investment she's putting into you. And that is how you know that your attraction is really lighting up. And if the attraction is lighting up, that's when you can start adding in some light touches. You want to create that physical connection between you two, especially if it's flirtatious. And you can always come up with stories that include some physical interaction, For example, there's always the silly games of being able to read their palms and things like that, and although some of it is cheesy, she's gonna know why you're doing it, and if she's enjoying her time with you, she's gonna let you go on, okay? She's not stupid. She knows that you're flirting with her. And if you've created a fun, safe, enjoyable environment by being able to control the subjects and the conversation with these scripts and stories, everything's gonna fall into place for you perfectly. So guys, I want to know now in the comments, have you ever used any scripts or stories or things like that? And they're okay if they're your go-to story. I'm just curious who out there is using scripts, because it was a game changer for me when I was starting out, and now that it starts to feel natural, every now and then I still pull out these stories because I know where they're gonna lead. And that's the whole point, is knowing where you're leading with, knowing where you're going, because you're meant to be in control of the driver's seat. If you found any value out of this, hit the like button. And if you feel like there's anyone out there that might be struggling with their social interactions and they need some advice, send it their way. Maybe this will make them think. Maybe they'll come up with some stories. Maybe you guys will come up with some stories together to help each other out. But until next time, I'll see you guys around. Take care.